Jarl Ragnar's daughter's wedding was meant to unite rival clans in peace. Every enemy had been invited, every grudge seemingly forgotten. But the kitchen servant who served the ceremonial wine had been planning this moment for 7 years. The marriage between Sigrid Ragnar's daughter and Harald Bloodaxe was more than a union of hearts. It was a political masterstroke designed to end decades of warfare between the most powerful clans in the Northern Territories. Both families had lost sons, brothers, and wealth to their endless feuding, and this wedding represented a chance to transform enemies into allies through ancient bonds of kinship. Jarl Ragnar the Gold Hoarder had spent months planning the celebration, determined to make it the most magnificent feast anyone had witnessed. His great hall was expanded to accommodate 300 guests, including jarls, chieftains, and warriors from across Scandinavia. The finest foods were imported from distant lands, the strongest ales were brewed from carefully hoarded grains, and the most skilled skalds were hired to compose songs that would immortalize this moment of peace. But the true genius of the celebration lay not in its magnificence, but in its guest list. Ragnar had invited everyone who had ever opposed him, fought him, or threatened his interests. Old enemies would sit beside former rivals, sharing meat and mead while their children played together in the hall. The message was clear. The age of warfare was ending, replaced by an era of cooperation and mutual prosperity. "Let no one say that Ragnar the Gold Hoarder holds grudges," he proclaimed during the planning sessions. "This wedding will wash away old blood with new wine. Every man who has ever raised a sword against me will drink at my table and leave as my brother." The kitchen staff worked tirelessly preparing dishes that would satisfy the diverse tastes of guests from different regions and clans. Among them was Kari, a quiet woman who had served in Ragnar's household for 3 years. She was efficient, invisible, and perfectly suited to the demanding work of preparing a feast for hundreds of powerful men with dangerous appetites. Her knowledge of cooking was exceptional, her brewing skills were impressive, and most importantly, she never caused problems or drew attention to herself. Nobody remembered exactly when Kari had joined the household staff. She simply appeared one day during the busy harvest season, claiming to be a widow seeking honest work. Her references seemed genuine, her skills were undeniable, and her quiet competence made her invaluable for managing complex kitchen operations. But Kari remembered exactly when she had arrived, and more importantly, why she had come to serve in the hall of her greatest enemy. 7 years earlier, Kari had been known by a different name in a different place. She was Astrid Eriksdotter, wife of a prosperous merchant and mother of 2 children who filled her life with joy and purpose. Her husband, Olaf, traded in amber and furs, building a modest but comfortable fortune through honest dealings with neighboring settlements. Their home was filled with laughter, their warehouse stocked with goods from distant lands, and their future seemed bright with possibility. Astrid spent her days teaching her children about the family business, while Olaf traveled trade routes that connected their settlement to markets across the known world. 8-year-old Thora showed remarkable skill with numbers and languages, while 5-year-old Eric possessed his father's natural talent for judging the quality of furs and amber. But prosperity in Viking territories attracted predators, and their success had caught the attention of Jarl Ragnar during one of his tax collection raids. Ragnar's interpretation of taxation was simple and brutal. Prosperous families owed him tribute, and those who refused to pay faced consequences that served as lessons to other potential resistors. When Ragnar's warriors arrived at their home on that terrible morning, Olaf tried to negotiate reasonably, offering fair tribute in exchange for protection and trading privileges. He displayed the ledgers that showed their honest profits, explained the routes that generated their income, and proposed partnership arrangements that would benefit everyone involved. He was a merchant, not a warrior, and he believed that reasonable men could always find mutually beneficial solutions to their conflicts. But Ragnar's men were in the mood for violence rather than negotiation. They had come expecting resistance that would justify plunder, and Olaf's willingness to cooperate actually disappointed them. They killed him for the entertainment value, laughing as his blood soaked into the wooden floor where his children had learned to walk. Then they systematically burned the family's home and warehouse as examples to other merchants who might consider resisting taxation demands. The real horror came when Ragnar's warriors discovered Astrid's 2 children hiding in the root cellar beneath their home. Little Thora and Eric were dragged out screaming, their faces reflecting terror that would haunt their mother's dreams forever. They clung to each other, trying to understand why these strange men were destroying their world for no reason they could comprehend. "Please," Astrid begged, falling to her knees before Ragnar's horse, "they're just children. They've done nothing wrong. Take me instead, take everything we own, but spare innocent lives." Ragnar looked down at the weeping woman with the casual indifference he reserved for people whose lives meant nothing to him. His response was delivered with the practiced cruelty of someone who had never questioned his right to take whatever he wanted from people weaker than himself. "Children grow up to become enemies," he said, gesturing to his men with bored efficiency. "Better to eliminate future problems while they're still manageable. Kill them both, but make it quick. We have other settlements to visit today." Astrid watched her children die, their small bodies broken by men who treated murder as routine business. The trauma should have destroyed her mind completely. Most people couldn't survive witnessing such horror and maintain their sanity. But grief can transform some people into something harder than madness, something more dangerous than rage. As Astrid knelt in the ashes of her former life, surrounded by everything she had loved turned into corpses and ruins, she made a decision that would reshape her fundamental identity and define the next 7 years of her existence. She would become someone else entirely, someone patient enough to wait years for perfect revenge, someone invisible enough to infiltrate the enemy's household without suspicion, someone skilled enough to poison an entire hall full of warriors without being detected or stopped. Astrid Eriksdotter died that day with her children and husband. But from their ashes rose Kari the kitchen servant, and she had very specific plans for her new life. Becoming Ragnar's trusted servant required more than just showing up and claiming to need work. Kari had to construct an entire false identity, complete with believable history, verifiable skills, and most importantly, a personality so unremarkable that nobody would ever suspect her of harboring dangerous secrets or planning elaborate revenge. She spent months in distant settlements learning advanced cooking techniques from skilled women, claiming to be preparing for employment in a great household that would require sophisticated culinary abilities. She studied brewing methods that would allow her to create ales and wines with specific properties that ordinary cooks never mastered. Most crucially, she researched botanical compounds that could be prepared from common kitchen ingredients and administered without detection. The knowledge required for such deadly preparations wasn't typically available to ordinary servants, but Kari had advantages that most potential poisoners lacked. Her late husband's extensive trading expeditions had brought exotic spices, preserved medicines, and rare substances from across the known world. Astrid had always been fascinated by their properties and effects, which plants could heal wounds rapidly, which could induce peaceful sleep, and which could kill slowly enough that death appeared to result from natural causes rather than deliberate poisoning. When Kari finally arrived at Ragnar's hall seeking employment, she was perfectly prepared for her role. Her references were genuine. She had actually worked for the family she claimed, performing exactly the services she described with skill that impressed everyone who employed her. Her cooking abilities were exceptional. Her knowledge of food preservation was extensive, and her understanding of how to manage large-scale meal preparation was invaluable for a household that frequently hosted important guests. But her true purpose remained hidden beneath carefully constructed layers of normalcy and competence. Every smile she gave to Ragnar's warriors was calculated to maintain her cover. Every meal she prepared for them was a rehearsal for the final performance. Every conversation she had with other servants was an opportunity to gather intelligence about schedules, preferences, and security arrangements. For 3 long years, Kari served the men who had murdered her family. She poured their wine with steady hands, prepared their food with professional skill, cleaned their weapons without showing emotion, and listened to their casual stories about raids, conquests, and the routine violence that defined their lives. She laughed at their crude jokes, complimented their strength and prowess, and made herself so useful and reliable that they stopped seeing her as a person and started treating her as particularly valuable household equipment. Every day was an exercise in perfect self-control. Every interaction with Ragnar himself required her to suppress memories of her children's screams and her husband's blood. But she endured it all with patience, born from absolute certainty that justice would eventually be served in exactly the manner she had planned during the darkest nights of her grief and rage. When Jarl Ragnar announced his daughter's wedding feast, Kari understood immediately that the gods had finally provided her with the perfect opportunity for comprehensive justice. Not only would Ragnar himself be present and vulnerable, but he was inviting every enemy, rival, and competitor who had ever opposed him. The guest list would include dozens of jarls and chieftains who had participated in raids similar to the one that destroyed her family. More importantly, the wedding feast format would provide ideal cover for the kind of mass poisoning that could eliminate entire political networks in a single evening. Traditional Norse wedding celebrations involved elaborate communal toasts, where everyone drank simultaneously from specially prepared ceremonial wine, making it possible to poison large numbers of people without creating immediate suspicion that might alert potential survivors. The technical challenge was enormous. Kari needed to create poisons that would be completely undetectable in taste, effective in relatively small doses, and capable of killing in ways that might initially appear to be natural causes rather than obvious assassinations. She also needed to ensure that the timing would allow her to escape before anyone realized what had happened and began searching for the person responsible. Drawing on her extensive botanical knowledge and the exotic substances her husband had collected during his trading expeditions, Kari began the delicate process of selecting and preparing the perfect combinations of lethal compounds. She chose toxins derived from plants that grew commonly in northern forests, but required sophisticated processing techniques to concentrate their deadly properties while eliminating the bitter tastes that might alert victims. The preparation process took months of careful, methodical work. She had to extract essential poisons, combine them in precise proportions that would maximize effectiveness while minimizing detectability, and test the results on small animals to ensure the mixtures would work exactly as planned when the crucial moment arrived. Most cleverly, Kari prepared different poison strengths for different categories of guests, ensuring that the most important targets would receive lethal concentrations, while lesser enemies might suffer severe illness, but potentially survive to spread confusion about whether the deaths were intentional assassinations or terrible accidents. The celebration began at midday with traditional ceremonies that united 2 powerful families, while their assembled guests witnessed the creation of new political alliances that could reshape the balance of power throughout the region. Sigrid looked radiant in silk robes imported from Constantinople, while Harold wore armor polished to mirror brightness that reflected the great hall's magnificent decorations. But the real spectacle was the guest list itself. Men who had been trying to kill each other for decades now sat side by side, sharing stories of past battles and making tentative overtures toward future cooperation that might benefit everyone involved. Warriors who had fought in bitter campaigns against each other were now discussing potential joint ventures and trading partnerships. The atmosphere was charged with genuine possibility. Ragnar moved through the celebration like a master diplomat, greeting old enemies with apparent warmth and sincerity, while making elaborate toasts that acknowledged past conflicts but pointed toward a more prosperous future that could be shared by former rivals. His transformation from ruthless raider to visionary peacemaker seemed complete and convincing. Meanwhile, Kari worked invisibly in the expanded kitchens, overseeing the preparation and service of dozens of elaborate courses, while ensuring that every detail of her carefully planned poisoning operation proceeded exactly according to schedule. She had spent weeks training the other servants to follow specific protocols for wine service, explaining these detailed procedures as necessary requirements for managing such a large and politically important event. The other kitchen workers accepted her instructions without question because Kari had spent 3 years establishing her reputation as someone completely devoted to household efficiency and professional excellence. Nobody suspected that their most trusted and reliable kitchen coordinator harbored any motives beyond contributing to the success of such an important celebration. The climactic moment came during the traditional wedding toast, when bride and groom would drink from a shared cup, while their assembled guests honored their union with simultaneous consumption of specially prepared ceremonial wine that had been blessed by the household priest. "Friends and kinsmen," Ragnar bellowed, rising to his feet with a magnificent golden drinking horn filled with Kari's specially prepared vintage. "We gathered tonight not as enemies or rivals, but as brothers united in celebration of love, peace, and prosperity that can benefit all our peoples." The entire hall rose with him in a thunderous rustling of clothing and scraping of chairs, 300 of the most powerful men in Scandinavia lifting their cups in unified acknowledgement of this historic moment of reconciliation. The sound echoed like an earthquake as warriors who had spent their lives fighting each other now stood together in apparent harmony. "To Sigrid and Harold," Ragnar continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the expanded hall. "May their marriage bring the same peace to our clans that love has brought to their hearts." To peace and prosperity, the guests responded in thunderous unison, their voices blending into a roar that shook the hall's massive timber foundations as they drained their cups with the genuine enthusiasm of men who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a new era. Kari watched from the kitchen doorway as every single target on her 7-year list consumed the revenge she had prepared with such patient, methodical precision. Jarl Ragnar himself, the man who had personally ordered her children's deaths, took the deepest drink of all, emptying his ceremonial horn completely before calling for servants to refill it. For the first time in 7 long years of careful planning and perfect self-control, Kari allowed herself to smile with genuine emotion rather than calculated performance. Justice was finally being served. The poison worked exactly as Kari had designed it to work after months of careful testing and preparation. For the first hour after the toast, the symptoms resembled nothing more serious than the expected effects of exceptional ale and rich food consumed in celebration quantities. The guests became more boisterous and affectionate than usual, more willing to embrace former enemies and make proclamations of eternal friendship that they might normally have considered embarrassing. The atmosphere grew increasingly jovial as old grudges seemed to dissolve in wine and fellowship. But gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the celebration began taking on a more sinister tone. Individual guests started complaining of stomach pains and digestive discomfort, initially attributing their problems to overindulgence in unfamiliar foods or the excitement of such a momentous occasion. However, the most heavily poisoned guests began showing signs of much more serious distress that couldn't be explained away as simple overindulgence. Excessive sweating, difficulty breathing, and mental confusion that went well beyond the effects of strong ale became increasingly apparent. Jarl Ragnar himself was among the first to recognize that something was seriously wrong. As the primary target of Kari's revenge, he had received the highest poison concentration, and his body was beginning to shut down in ways that couldn't be explained by drinking or rich food. "Something's very wrong here," he gasped to his closest advisors, his face growing pale and his breathing becoming labored. "This isn't just ale sickness. Get the healers immediately." But many of the healers were among the wedding guests, and they were experiencing their own medical crises. The few who remained functional found themselves confronting symptoms they had never encountered before, affecting numbers of patients that overwhelmed any possibility of effective treatment. As the evening progressed, the great hall transformed from a scene of joyous celebration into something resembling a medical catastrophe. Men who had been toasting peace and prosperity just hours earlier were now writhing in agony, their bodies betraying them in ways that clearly suggested deliberate poisoning rather than natural illness. The investigation began even while people were still dying in increasing numbers. Those guests who'd consumed smaller poison doses retained enough strength to search for explanations, and their attention naturally focused on the kitchen operations that had provided all food and drink for the celebration. When the surviving guests and their retainers reached the kitchens, seeking answers and demanding explanations, they made a discovery that sent chills through everyone who heard about it. Kari had vanished completely and utterly. Not just left the building or departed the settlement, but disappeared so thoroughly that it seemed she had never existed at all. Her personal belongings were gone without a trace, her sleeping area had been cleaned out with systematic thoroughness, and most mysteriously, none of the other servants could remember specific details about her background, her history, or even her physical appearance beyond the most general descriptions. She said she was a widow from the eastern settlements, one kitchen maid reported when questioned by increasingly desperate survivors. But now that I think about it carefully, she never actually talked about her dead husband or her former life. She just worked, efficiently, quietly. The search for the mysterious Kari expanded rapidly throughout the settlement and surrounding areas, but it quickly became clear that whoever she really was, she had planned her escape route as carefully as she had planned the mass poisoning itself. No one had seen her leave, no one could describe the route she had taken, and most frustratingly, no one could provide enough information to make pursuit realistic. Meanwhile, the death toll continued, mounting steadily. By dawn, 63 guests had died, including some of the most powerful political figures in the Northern Territories. Among the dead was Jarl Ragnar himself, the man whose vision of peace through alliance had unknowingly created the perfect opportunity for unprecedented revenge. The aftermath of the wedding massacre created political chaos that lasted for years. With so many leaders dead simultaneously, power vacuums opened across multiple territories, creating instability that led to exactly the kind of warfare Ragnar had been trying to prevent. But for Kari, sailing away on a merchant ship toward new lands where nobody would ever connect her to the tragedy, the political consequences were irrelevant compared to the personal justice that had finally been achieved. She had proven that patience, intelligence, and determination could triumph over strength and cruelty when properly applied with sufficient planning. The woman who had spent 7 years serving her family's killers while planning their destruction could finally stop pretending to be someone else, stop smiling at men she hated, stop preparing meals while secretly planning murder. Astrid Eriksdotter had been laid to rest at last alongside her murdered children and husband. The wedding feast that was supposed to create lasting peace had instead delivered the most perfect justice imaginable, comprehensive, poetic, and absolutely final. Standing on the deck under open sky, the woman who had been both Astrid and Kari understood that her revenge was complete. She had proven that some servants are more dangerous than any warrior, that some debts can only be paid in blood, and that justice, however delayed, always finds its way to those who deserve it most. If this tale of ultimate payback moved you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which part shocked you the most. Subscribe to Time for Payback for more legendary stories where betrayal meets justice, and don't forget to ring that notification bell, because every betrayal has its reckoning, and every story holds the power to change everything. What revenge story should we tell next? Drop your suggestions below. Until next time, remember, karma never forgets.